Hi, I'm Peter Panagore. I died ice climbing. It was 1981, and I was a national student exchange student at Montana State University. And come spring break in March, I decided not to go back to Boston to my family because of the pain that was there, and instead looked for a high adventure outdoor trip. I was a backpacker, a mountaineer, a national ski patrol, been a Boy Scout, for my whole life winter camping. And so the idea of going out into the mountains in the winter was something that was normal for me. I went down to the outing club and I found a tag outside the outing club of a man asking for a partner to go to Alberta and British Columbia for a 10-day ice climbing and snow caving trip. 8-day snow caving, 1-day ice climbing. So we met and we found that we had complementary skills. We geared ourselves up and we left. It's a long way from Bozeman to Banff, and we got to know each other pretty well on the way, and we were hopefully going to be able to trust each other, because in wilderness experiences, especially in the wintertime, danger is everywhere. And so learning to trust each other was the most important thing we could do during the snow caving trip, which is what we did. We learned to trust each other. I could tell you stories about that little part of the trip because we had some adventures, but they don't really play into what happened next. So on the end of that trip, we had a 1-day climb planned. And I'd been a rock climber, but not an ice climber. Tim was a certified lead climber, and he knew of this place called Lower Weeping Wall on the Icefields Parkway in Canada, in Banff Provincial Park, along the Saskatchewan River, right next to the river, right next to the Icefields Parkway. A short walk into the woods over maybe 8 or 10 feet of snow that was packed because lots of people climbed there, is a world famous ice climb, Lower Weeping Wall. And when we arrived just after sunrise that morning, teams were already climbing. And so we were the last team on the ice. And as we approached, a man fell. And everybody gasped and held our breath, and all of our adrenaline rose. But he was on his line, and he fell down the ice twice the distance from the pin that was beneath him. And then he was fine. I'm okay. But everybody was now, wow. And we started our climb, and the thing that made our climb so difficult was that I only had one ice axe instead of two. I had a hammer in one hand and an axe in the other. The axe is much taller and longer. Put it in the ice, tip it in, relax with the strap around your hand and rest. Hammer much shorter, put it in the ice, tip it in, have to stay gripped to it because it has no strap to dangle from. It only has a strap on the bottom that you can dangle it from so you don't drop it. Which meant that my climb was more strenuous than everyone else on the climb that day because I was exerting all extra energy because I couldn't rest one arm. So this whole 500 or 600 foot climb, I always had to grip. I could never relax, which slowed our climb, increasingly slowed our climb moment by moment. So by the time we reached the top of the climb at sunset, we had already known for hours of the desperate situation we were encountering. Because in ice climbing, you can't just decide to go down the way you came up. You can't do that. And it's not like backpacking. You have to complete the climb to then make the descent. And so the whole end of the climb, we were scared and wet because it's a wet sport. It's March, I should say. It's March, and we're a long day's drive from the Arctic Circle. It's cold, but we're not cold because it's the daytime, and we have no extra food and no extra water and no more gear to keep us warm. Ice climbing is not like backpacking. Backpacking, you can go back down the trail if things look tough. But ice climbing, you have to complete the climb and go to the rappel in order to get off. You can't go back down the way you came up. And so for hours before we reached our destination, we knew the kind of trouble that we were in. By the time we reached the top of the climb, the sun was setting, the temperature dropped 30 degrees, And I watched the last of the other teams. There may have been a dozen other teams climbing that day. I watched the last of them leave, and I watched them look up at me. I was 500 or 600 feet above them. They waved and left. And they knew the situation we were in. And we knew the situation we were in. And one thing never struck me till now. Maybe they told the warden. Because later in the night the warden showed up. But at the time, we didn't know. So we're sitting on the top of the climb, and hypothermia begins. We get the physical shakes. We shiver. We shiver so that every muscle, large and small, contracts, feels like in opposite situations. And so I'm shaken and my jaw is clattering, and the sweat that's touching my skin is now freezing. I'm beginning to freeze. And we knew the situation was desperate. And Tim pulled up this rope. The rope was 300 feet long. It's a double line when you climb and a double line when you rappel. And he hauled this thing up as fast as he could, and it turned into a knot, a tangled mess. And so, me being the better rope untangler, I took my gloves off and started to get frostbite. The sun had set, the temperature had dropped, and it was so cold that our bodies were violently shivering. Every muscle was contracting, seemingly opposite of every other muscle, so the whole thing was shaking. My jaw was clattering like in a cartoon, with my teeth making noise, and the same thing was happening to him. And he hauled up that 300-foot rope, double line. You climb with the double line, you rappel with the double line, and it became a 300-foot tangle. And it was cold. And I was just wearing thermal underwear, a wool sweater, a shell, wool pants, and longies underneath. And I had to take my gloves off. My gloves were these rag wool mittens with leather chaps covered with oil. Not much protection when the temperature drops 30 degrees. So I took off my gloves because I had to, and I began to untangle the knot, being the better of the two of us in untangling. We each had skills. That's why we partnered up. And the stars were out. There were 1 billion stars in the sky. They were every single color and all different sizes. And so there was illumination. We could see. It wasn't pitch black. It was black and white, just enough light to see by. And we knew the danger that we were in. And as I untangled the knot with our jaws clattering, we had to have a conversation about what we were going to do, because both of us knew we were going to die there. Death was what was going to happen that night. It was not thinking we might die. We knew that we're 600 feet up. We have no way of staying warm. The temperature's down 30 degrees. I've been working at Bridger Bowl, with a ski area in Bozeman, on the National Ski Patrol that winter as a volunteer, pulling people off the mountain with frostbite and hypothermia. So it was in my mind. I had a refresher course on the stages of hypothermia and what happens to you. And so we decided that if we tried to snuggle up against the mountain, canoodling, we didn't have enough warmth between us to save our lives. We were going to die if we stayed where we were. And we knew that we might have a chance to survive if we fought our way off the mountain in the dark. And so that's what we decided to do. And after a long period of time, I finalized untangling the rope, and we began to gather ourselves together, bring up our courage, and tie ourselves to each other with the rope, because we had to traverse across to the first rappel in the dark, and on a cliff, on ice. This is what we did. Tim led. I was 10 feet behind him. We were using our axes to hold ourselves in position and to make sure that we had 3 points of contact on the ground, trying to prevent slips. We were wearing crampons on our feet, those big ice spiky things on the bottom of stiff boots, so we had grip. Tim and I tied off about 10 feet apart and made the traverse in the dark with crampons on our feet, those big icy spiky things, on stiff boots, using our ice axes as canes, traversing in the dark over a cliff to the first rappel. And by the time we got to the first rappel, hypothermia had begun to muddle our minds already. And we made I made the first bad decision with the hammer. Tim had agreed that I could climb. I bravadoed my way into it. This next decision was almost fatal to us also. And we agreed on this. There was this tree, and what you're supposed to do is take a flat nylon tube, they're called webbing, tie it in a square knot and make a loop and put it around the tree and put the rope through the nylon webbing and then rappel and then pull the rope down to you through the webbing so it doesn't grip or freeze to the tree. But hypothermia was making us irrational, and we decided that the value of this piece of webbing worth $5 was worth it to not use it. And so we agreed, and we threw the rope around the tree, and we descended down the 150 feet, at the bottom of which there was an incline dangling, so free falling down, not free rappelling down. And that plays into what happens next. We get to the bottom. Tim went first, I went second, and separated the rope and began to pull on the line to pull it down, and it froze to the tree. It stuck to the tree 150 feet up, and I couldn't get it free, and Tim grabbed hold of it with me, and with all of our weight combined, we couldn't pull this rope free. And so now we're on a ledge maybe 10 feet, 15 feet wide, and we can't go up and we can't go down. We can't even get our rope. And this is ours. The snow is about 4 feet deep, and at this point we begin to lose our physical coordination. We have a hard time walking. We're both athletes. We're both very athletic, and we're having a hard time taking a step in the snow. We're falling over, and our brains were beginning to work less well. Our lips were freezing, and we couldn't get the rope free. Hours we pulled on this thing. And eventually Tim said, I'm going to go back up there. There's nothing else I can do. And I agreed. And he knew this type of hitch. It's like a knot. It's a friction hitch. It's called a persig. And you tie it in such a way with big loops on the bottom of it, with thin line. He tied one to each rope. And you can slide this thing up, and when you pull on the loop, it locks in. And he made the loops long enough that he could put his boots inside of them. And I took the long rope, or the climbing rope, and I wrapped it around my waist, and I rolled myself as tight as I could to make the line taut going up, because he was going to ascend back up the rope with this free climb space with no protection. And so he lifted one arm and foot at the same time, lift the knot, and began to ascend. And I was in the snow, sort of looking down, and I don't know how far he got up, 20, 30 feet maybe, and suddenly he yelled, falling! The rope had jerked free, and I rolled out of the way, and he landed half on me and half in the snow, and he was fine. The rope came free, and we pulled the rope down, and at this point, a car came down the highway, down the Icefields Parkway. There's no traffic. This is the middle of nowhere. And it pulls into the parking lot across from us. And it turns around and it flashes its lights. It looks and it flashes its lights. We jump up and down and wave. It flashes its lights again. We deduce it's the Warden. We had signed into the log. You have to sign into a log when you go into a wilderness area, tell your destination, tell what you're doing, and then you sign out that night. As planned. We never signed out. Now, whether those other climbers alerted that Warden or not, I don't know. But it could have happened. All I know is that the Warden came looking for us. And when he flashed his lights, we were like, oh my God, somebody knows we're here. And we pulled up the rope. We made our next traverse to the next rappel, which was sort of around a corner in a craggy sort of way, on a not this kind of slope, but it was sort of this way, so we kind of came down, but it was really rocky and craggy, and at the bottom of it you had to turn around a corner and go onto a ledge. And at the very top there was a pin with an iron ring in it, and we put the rope through that, and Tim went down first and turned the corner, and I came down behind him onto a ledge the size of an eighth of the size of the porch I'm sitting on. And facing up against the wall were two iron pins with rings, with carabiners, and webbing harness straps with carabiners on the end so we could clip ourselves in. And once we clipped ourselves into this place, the Warden flashed his lights and drove away. And we thought to ourselves, we just have to, it's only 150 feet down. And I took the rope, and by now, I should describe my situation. My feet are blocks of ice, and that is, I can't bend my toes. Everything's frozen. My big toe is still, I can't still feel the ground underneath it. So 40 years later, my fingertips are all, every time the temperature goes below 50 degrees, my fingers hurt. I write with gloves on because of all of this. So there we were, frozen feet, hypothermia, advancing every moment, confusion. I take the rope, I pull off my gloves, I lay them down, I tie one end of the rope to my harness. My feet were frozen blocks of ice. I couldn't bend my toes. I still can't feel my big toe. My hands, frostbite all over my fingertips. 50 degrees, I have to wear gloves. We were in a desperate situation. But I had to take off my gloves to tie the line to my harness, which I did, and then I took the other end of the line and I tossed it off to the side and I pulled on the rope and it jammed on the first pull. And there's no way that we could go back around the corner and find where the jam was, because to do that meant death. We would fall. So I began to just pull on the rope and pull on the rope, and it just got tighter and tighter. And I couldn't let Tim help me because there wasn't really enough line. And if I had untied it for him to reach it, we would have dropped it because we couldn't feel our fingers. We couldn't feel anything. And so I don't know how long I was there pulling on the rope, hours. But there came this point where I realized that I was not getting out of this situation. And that I was going to die where I was. And I need to say that I was terrified all night. I was terrified in a way that I can't explain. I was driven by this desire for survival. And this power of willpower to keep my fear in place, because the little rationality that I had, I needed to keep. And there came this moment when I realized I was not going to get out of this. And I looked around at the stars. The moon had come up by now, so I could see better, could see the beautiful snow and ice covered mountain across the way, hear the Saskatchewan River. And I gave up. And I decided it's a good place to die. And I started thinking about my family, my mom and my dad. My sister had run away when I was a kid and my family was broken. It's the reason I left Boston and went west, because I couldn't take it anymore. But there's a worse thing, as terrible as it is to lose a child, which is the worst thing in the history of the world. You get to mourn, but when a child leaves, there's no mourning, there's only grief. And that grief, it's always present, because it's always mixed with this little bit of hope, so it never dies. And I thought to myself, can my parents survive another child's loss? And I knew that I couldn't change that. I knew that I was going to die, and they were going to lose me, and I couldn't do anything. I knew that I was going to die. I knew that I was going to die, and they were going to lose me, and there was nothing I could do about it. And all the while, I kept pulling on the rope, not believing that it was ever going to come free. But I had to do something. And then I began to fall asleep. No. And then I got hot. And I know better. Ski patrol for years. Hypothermia, it's a fake thing. But I unzip my coat. That's why hypothermic people are found naked, because they get hot, but they're not. And I remember feeling what felt like all of my blood rushing from all of my extremities into my core, my brain, my heart, my lungs. And I remember thinking, I don't need my feet. I can live without my arms. This is good. But I'm really hot, and I'm too hot. And so I unzipped my coat, and Tim told me, zip up your coat. And I'm like, I'm not zipping up my coat. It might be the only thing, that was the last thing he said to me. And then I began to fall asleep. And I would fall asleep, which is last stages. I'd fall asleep, I'd collapse, I'd be unconscious, I would black out, fall down and hit the ledge I was standing on, helmeted head, wake up because of the crash, stand back up, pull myself up, pull the rope, repeat. I don't know how many times. And then I stood up this time. And as I stood up this last time, my peripheral vision had a big black circle around it, and like a spotlight, and it just collapsed. And I watched it, I looked around, and as I looked around, it followed my vision, so I knew it was in my head, and it just, until it was gone. And as it blacked out, I thought, oh, I'm falling asleep. Well, this is weird, I've never seen this before. I must be passing out. And when it went black, I didn't pass out. I didn't black out. I was in darkness, but I was conscious in darkness, and all of my pain was gone. And in my vision in front of me, where the mountain had been, when I'd been standing, it just felt like it looked like it opened up for me into this vast darkness, this vast horizon, far as I could see. And I could see that it was darkness. I could see this darkness extending sort of from my peripheral vision outward into infinity. And I remember wondering, what is this? And way, way far in the furthest distance was a little pinprick, like a pinprick through a piece of paper with light behind it. And suddenly there was a bit of light in the middle of this darkness, and that light came rushing toward me at incredible speed, faster than the distance it could have covered, the speed of light. It was so far away and came so fast, and as it came toward me, it expanded and got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger proportionally, and it was almost at the snap of a fingers. It was right on me, and it communicated to me telepathically. I heard it inside of myself, and it said to me without language, I'm taking you. And I thought, you're not taking me. And I took all of my willpower that I had strengthened myself with, or was strengthened by through the night, and I put it up as a shield, and it just reached right through and took me, plucked me right out. And in the moment of the plucking, I had this overwhelming sense of all power, all powerful. And it just took me. And I was like a rag doll in a boat in a river. And I was enveloped inside of this intellect, because it was talking to me the whole time, saying, I love you, here's comfort, here's healing. And it swept me up and out. I talk in metaphor here. I say up and out, I say angel, I say intellect. None of these come close to what it is. It's so much more. All I can do is approximate it. And so I'm inside of this entity, and I know this entity. This is an entity. It's my angel. I know this being. And I say angel, but it's not angel like wings. It's intelligence. It's power. It's comfort. It's knowledge. It knows me. I know it. And I relax into this, and I am carried. And the infinite darkness is still infinitely dark, but it also seems to be like a pipe, a tube, and I'm carried inside of this angel, and I carried up, the same way that it came in, that same distance, and then I am popped out. Or maybe it expanded. It's very difficult to say, but now I'm in a different kind of darkness. I'm in a larger darkness. This darkness is also illuminated, so I can see further than I've ever seen in my life. I can see, I know that I can almost see to the end of infinity. But I can't see that far. And I see myself, and I am not physical. I have no physicality whatsoever. I am no thing. I am in nothing. There is no thing there. Nothing that is in this world is there at all, except for I am a consciousness of, I describe it as an orb of energy, an orb of consciousness, that my being, my sensing, my thinking, my self-identity, it's all the same thing. And I know that I never was Peter. I'd never been Peter. I'd always been this conscious energy, and I had somehow forgotten that this was true. And so I was comfortable. I was fearless. I was home. I was me. And then I tell my story in a sequence of events, but there's no sequence of events because this is timelessness. I know I'm in timelessness. It's not just the now, the eternal now, which it is. It's all time everywhere in the eternal now. It's not just linear time in our universe or how time bends. It's all time. It's all right where I am. And it is this place that I'm inside of, which is infinite. So how can it even be a place? And a door opened in front of me, a portal, an opening, a rending, and it was a flow of light, a cascade like a waterfall, transparent and translucent and solid at the same time. And pearlescence, it was light itself in fluid motion, and I could see its surface, and I could see its depth, and I could see its infinity. There was an arcing tunnel that went inside of it, an entryway, and I was welcomed. There was this welcome coming from it, and I took myself, my being, and I touched it, and as I touched it, it flowed into me and became me. And I was immersed inside of this envelope of light, and that was all power. It was all knowledge and all understanding. And I knew that I was known, and I'd always been known. And I saw the origin of myself, not my Peterness, but the creation of my soul. I saw the length of the breath of the life of my true self, my higher self. And I was like a photon, both inside the divine creator itself, of it, created by it, made from it, and also limited, of the same substance, but limited. And I could see the size of my soul. The size of my soul is immense, and I am ancient. And I could see all my other lives I had lived or was living. I was in timelessness, and I could see that I wasn't even sure if they were in this universe. All I know now is that I was never a single one of them. I was never any of these incarnations. Whatever I learned in them, I was always this singular photon of light. This singular goodness is the true nature of myself. Even as my soul, I could look and see my soul was an emanation of this same photon, which was an emanation of the divine itself. And while all of this is going on simultaneously, I also see and know that I am fully known as a human being, that I had just recently been. All of my history, all of the aspects of my life, everything about myself is right present to me. I know that I am fully known, and there is nothing about me that's hidden. And the voice, which is soundless, and surrounding me, in which I am immersed, the voice is this entire infinity, and as am I, and it is inside of me, and it's saying to me, I am creator, you are my creature, I know you, I have always known you, there's nothing about you that is unknown to me, and it shows me the length of my life, of my soul, and it shows me my human life. And in my human life, it sees all of my dark corners. There's nothing hidden from it. And I go through a hell of my own making. I go through all of the pain that I gave away in my life to everyone in sequence from their point of view, as if I'm inside them experiencing the moment that I gave it to them and their emotional response to the meanness or the cruelty or the wound that I intended to give them. And it's magnified. And so as I experience it inside them, I had no idea that it was 10,000 times the size that I thought it was when I gave it to them. I felt all of the pain that I gave away in sequence, and like inside a movie, like a 3D movie. But I'm two characters in this movie. I'm the one that received the pain, but I'm also the one that gave it. And in this character, I see all of my reasons for causing all of the sequence of pain through my whole life, from the moment of my birth to the moment of my death. Every single event in which I caused pain to somebody, I experience from inside of them, and I see all the justifications and reasons that I had for causing their pain. All of my vengeance, all of my envy, all of my jealousy, all of my anger, all of my cruelty, all of this, it expresses inside of my head. Is that too loud?
It's okay.
All of this expresses inside of my head simultaneous to what I experience from inside of them, and I judge myself. I judge myself as guilty. I am guilty for causing them undeserved pain. But I judge myself not against myself or against them. I judged myself against the immensity of the love in which I am immersed. The love is speaking inside of me, saying, I love you. But it's not just the words, I love you. It's an experience of infinite love. This love is cleansing to me. I use the language, the divine fire of purgative love, which I took from Catherine of Genoa. I am cleansed by this love. I am cleansed by this experience. This pain, these are all the shackles that I made in life. I love to use this Christmas carol. These are the chains I forged in life, says Marley to Scrooge. These were the chains I forged in my life, and I couldn't bring them with me. And the fire of love burned them from me. They were gone from me. All of the attachments that chained me to my life, to my guilt, to my self-judgment, vanished from me as the voice kept speaking inside me. I love you, I love you, I made you, I know you, I forgive you. And it showed me that I had no guilt. And the no guilt I had was that I did not make the universe. In the end of the book of Job, God says to Job, did you make these creatures? You didn't make these creatures. It's not your fault that you're a creature in my universe and the universe functions to cause pain. That's not your fault. And it showed me all of humanity and all of the pain that all humanity causes each other. That's not their fault. But yes, I made choices. It's this paradox. I still made choices in my life that caused real pain to people. And even though I wasn't the game designer of the system, I was the participant in it with will. And I willed to cause people pain. And those decisions that I made were released from me. And infilling inside of me was this multiplicity of all these facets of these things that we divide on earth: goodness, beauty, joy, healing, wholeness, truth, adoration, love, bliss, paradise, understanding, knowledge, compassion, hope, relationship, love, immeasurable, expanding inside me. Once those things left me, these things infilled me, but they weren't separate facets. Truth was not different than charity, and it wasn't different than hope. It's one thing of love, and it infilled me, expanding me, making me bigger and larger, till my energy self felt like if another bit was entered into me, I would have obliterated into non-being. And I was immersed inside of this infinity, which was this infilling inside of me, and so there was infinitely more to go. But my containment was limited. And then, in the state of awe and adoration, I asked, am I dead? And the voice said, yes, you're dead. Come home. It's time for you to come home. I said, but I haven't gone through the tunnel yet. And the voice said, no, come home. Choose. Make a choice. And I said, but my parents can't afford to lose another child. And in that instant, I was swept across heaven to the very edge of heaven where our universe is created. And I could see from my higher point of view galaxies. And then I could see, my vision was directed. I could see our galaxy, and I could see our star system, and I could see Earth. And Earth was like this hologram. And I could see 7 billion people all at once. Every single person alive, some sleeping, some at war, some being born, some dying, some making love, some banking, some teaching. Every single person, not like looking here and there and there. Everybody all at once. And inside of every single creature, every single human being was a point of light, the same point of light that I am. And the voice said to me, in the way that I love you now, I have always loved you. And it opened into this expanse of love that is immeasurably inexpressible for me. It carries with me. I carry with me into my life a drop of this love. And this drop of love that I have is 1,000,000 times greater than anything else I've experienced in my life. 1,000,000,000 times greater. It is so powerful in my life that it has become the focal point of my life. I have one beloved. I am beloved by my beloved, and I only have one, and it is the divine. And every single person I could see was as beloved as me. And I could see that everyone was covered. And in the way I love you now, I have always loved you, but you didn't know it. And nobody in the veil knows it. And there was like this deep foam over all of the earth, under which all these human beings functioned. And this foam was the veil. They couldn't see the light even inside them, let alone the light that was above them. And that was their suffering. And I could see my parents' faces in particular. And I could see their suffering. I could not just see their faces, I could see the length of their lives of suffering. Their suffering was a physical thing. And I could see it from the beginning to the end when they would die. And the voice said to me, you now know the length of your life is a wink of a human eye. Because of timelessness, you now know your eternal nature. You now know you are my beloved. You now know everyone is my beloved. You now know that your parents' suffering will end and they will be here soon. But I could also see their lives. I could see their lives without me. And I could see their lives with me inside myself. I could see that if I went back, they would suffer less. And so I said, I have another commitment. I'm in a theater company and we're going on this national tour. We've been in rehearsal from the Montana State University, a theater of silence for the deaf. We were going on a 14-state tour, 26,000 miles. And I said, I've got this commitment. And the director had grabbed me, and I love my director. He had grabbed me and said, Peter, don't get hurt on this trip. We can't replace you. And he was pretty upset that I was going. And I felt an obligation to him because I love this guy. And so I brought this up and said, I got this theater tour and I haven't gone through the tunnel yet. And do I have to stay here in this state of bliss with you? If this is my eternal nature, if this is who I am, and I know that it is true, it's not an if, I know this is who I am. I know that the divine is self-evident love to me. Can I come back here? Can I go back there and be with my parents to lessen some of their suffering? And can I then come back to this state of my divine being? And the voice said, yes, you can do that, but come home. And I said, I choose to live my life. And the voice said to me, you won't live your life. And sent me in an instant. In that instant, sent me. And as I went, I took on, I lost my divine full nature and took on a more compressed form. And as I took on this, my spirit astral self, people might call it, but it's before that self. It's this just before state where I had a million choices of entry back into my life again. I could choose the kind of life I would live, and I could see all of them. I could see all of the probabilities through all of the entry points that I could live, and they were all illuminated. And in the center of all of these millions of holes was a singular beam of white light, the divine self. I could choose to enter into the divine light and use that as my entry point. And I thought to myself, I don't want that. I want some will. I want some autonomy. I want to be a writer. I want to be a creative. I want to be a little bit of a bohemian. And so I chose an entry point just off to the above and to the side of it. And I entered that place. And this is all in an instant. I had an instant to see all of this and think that thought and make this choice. And in the moment of thinking, it wasn't that I chose that. It was in the moment of my thinking that my choice was made. And I entered into this tunnel, this tube, like a fiber optic with all of the branches off of it. Only it's not like a fiber optic because it has all of these probabilities of all of these choices are interrelated, and that all the choices that I could make in my life come with me. And I then tunnel down to my body, and I get compressed more and more and more, crushed smaller and smaller as I get closer and closer. And I can see this happening, and I can feel this crushing. And as I get to my body, I feel like I get screwed into my heart, like my entry point is my heart, and I get twisted inside. And each twist is pain. Each twist is suffering. And I am now compressed much smaller, spread through this physical form. And as my brain comes back up onto working order, it comes back online, my first experience is the return to suffering. I don't know what it is. I have no word for it. It's just pain. It's just pain. And now I'm in pain. And I remember that I had no pain. It wasn't like I had no pain. It was that pain didn't exist where I had been. And the first thing that happened to me coming back into the world of suffering was suffering. And I immediately regretted it. I regretted my choice. And as my brain came back online, I began to hear. And I began to hear noise and sound, and eventually it becomes screaming and yelling and shouting, and this thing I'm inside of, which I don't understand, begins to move, and my eyes open, and I begin to see, and I don't understand seeing or where I am or who I am or what I am. I have no understanding of what's going on except for pain. All I know is pain, and I get pulled, and I begin to stand up, and it's Tim, and he's shouting at me and yanking at me and trying to drag me up, and he's yelling, and I begin to understand what he's saying. He's like, you were dead. If you died, I was going to die. And he's crying, and he must have been crouched over me trying to wake me, and I was unresponsive, and I stood up, and I don't know where I am, and I don't even know what his name is. And finally I begin to understand the language he's using. And then he says, pull the rope, and I yank the rope, and it comes free on the first pull. And we descend, and we go to the car, and my brain is now functioning. And I don't know what's going on, but I know everything I knew before. I know that we're in a hypothermic situation. I know where we are. I know who he is. I know that I'm not myself. I know that I'm not this thing I'm living in, but this thing I'm living in has to survive. And so we set up the tent, and it's an expensive tent. It's his. It's got a chimney and a vent so we can run the stove. It's an Arctic tent. We can run the stove in the tent and heat the interior space without carbon monoxide building up. And we do that, and we heat up water to warm, and we get in our bags, and we sip warm tea until our bodies warm up enough so that we can get into the car and fire up the heater and the engine and heat ourselves the rest of the way. And that's what we do. And by the time the sun is up and we are finally warm enough to move, we pull the car over away from the parking lot, because we went right to the parking lot, and the warden showed up as we were packing the car and said to us, "Are you the boys who were on the climb last night?" "Yes, sir." "We were." He said, "I came to get your bodies, see if I needed the helicopter." And from that point on, I've never been the same person. I came back a different being. I'm still my soul. The problem isn't that I came back a different being, it's that now I know who I am. I know where I'm from, I know to whom I belong, and the world doesn't ever change that. And so I inhabit my body. And from that point on, my life was never the same. And I was angry. I was angry that I felt like I'd been tricked. "You won't live your life" sounded like a kick in the pants. You're out of here, boy, and you're not going to live that life. Well, what I didn't understand was that my life had ended. It was life 1.0 was done. I was called home. And why I was given a choice, I don't know. But I know that I was given a choice, and I regretted it. Because now I was an alien inside my body, and everything looked to me to be less than. Everything was black and white and two-dimensional, and eating was this most bizarre thing. On the drive home, we stopped and we had pizza, and I had to go into this illuminated place with all this plastic and all these people behind and plastic clothes, and then get a thing that I had to put in my mouth and consume it. I had to consume nothing. I had to consume nothing when I was dead. I was energy itself. I had no physicality. I was perfection, a part of perfection, in the presence of true perfection. I was more perfection, less crude. And from that point on, I self-isolated. I dove inside myself for the next, well, I still am, 40 years later, diving inside myself, creating the opening to the access point that's already inside me, digging my way back to create as much heaven here inside myself, to maintain my sanity. Because when I dove into a deep depression, a 10-year depression of anger. The thing to which I was most attracted was the thing that repelled me the most. Because I was so angry, but I had no other way to live in the world but to dive into it. And so that's what I did. I dove into it. I changed my career path. I was an undergraduate English major. I was going to go into architecture, into the family business. I'd been working toward that my whole life. I'd had a pencil in my hand, at a drafting board. I was working in construction all through college, building houses so I could be an inside guy. I could know the trades from the bottom up. And then I was going to go to graduate school and join the firm. And I came back a different person. We went on this theater tour, and I sat in the back of the pickup truck for 24,000 miles in my sleeping bag. I never rode in the van, 15-passenger van. I stayed by myself, and I meditated. I'd already been a meditator. I started when I was in high school. I went to a Catholic high school near St. Joseph's Abbey, where they teach centering prayer. And in the 1960s, Thomas Keating and William Meninger and we're looking at the young people dropping acid, finding meditation, going east. And so they developed centering prayer. They found Theravada Buddhism at the Buddhism School in Barre, Massachusetts. And they began teaching meditation. And I took to it immediately because I seemed to have been born a natural-born mystic. I always had a mystical side to me. And so I'd already been meditating for 4 years. And I knew that it was my only hope was to go in, because the only way out is in. And so I dove inside myself, and I keep diving. I define an NDE. The definition of an NDE fits inside the rubric of William James's Varieties of Religious Experience, 4 characteristics of mysticism. There's 4 characteristics of mysticism. There's transience. It has a beginning and an end. There's passivity. You don't make it happen. It happens to you by divine grace. It's noetic. It leaves knowledge inside you. Wisdom is another word for that. That's ineffable, unspeakable. Near-death experience is a type of mystical experience. Mystical experiences have been going on around the world historically for thousands of years. They're in every religion. Every religion starts because a mystic begins it. The difference between a high-level genius mystical experience like Rumi, Hafez, Lao Tzu, Jesus, Muhammad is that near-death experiencers have no cord connecting them to their bodies anymore. Their life is over. And so many mystics spend a lifetime of contemplation, of self-stripping, of removing the egoic self, of destroying the false self, and have a gradual stripping of the self and a gradual entry into mystical experience. Near-death experiencers, it's a radical shock. And you come back from this thing a wreck. I don't know of any mystical genius who came back from their experience a wreck. They came back disassembled. They came back with a new perspective, but they didn't come back with trauma. Near-death experiencers almost always have trauma, because the shock of dying is a scary thing. Human beings are afraid of dying. We're afraid of death. Well, one of the side effects of NDE that is a defining characteristic is none of us are afraid of death anymore. So a near-death experience is a separation from the body, of the consciousness from the mortality, being carried into the divine presence at its ultimate. Sometimes an NDE is just the separation from the body. You're in a car wreck, the paramedics, you pop out of your body, the paramedics show up 10 seconds later, they drop the paddles on you, you're back in your body again. You never saw an angel, you never traveled up the tunnel, you popped out, you're still an NDEer. You now know that you are not your body. And so for me, the basic fundamental characteristic of an after effect of a near-death experience is that you know you're not your body. You know that consciousness arises outside of the body and inhabits the body. I can tell you stories that have been told to me. I can show you medical proof of people's death, but what I can't show you is what skeptics are asking. Is it a hallucination? Is it a function of the brain? I can't prove that. My hope in the 21st century is that they do prove that, but I don't need that proof. Other people need that proof. The proof of near-death experience in my life is the life that I have lived. I have lived my near-death experience. It's not something in my past. It's something that happened to me one day, but it's the total reorientation of my life on a daily basis as I've lived it in my world, witnessed by hundreds, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. The proof of NDE is the love that I've pursued my whole life at cost to myself for the sake of others. And I was not that way before, okay? Yeah, I was a mystical spiritual person, but I wasn't this guy. This guy knows, I know who I am. I know who you are. That's the difference. Because when I look inside every single human being's eyes, I see the light. I also see whether they have a gate down and they hide the light, but I can't help but see the light. Every single person, every bird, every blade of grass, every rock, everything shines. Everything does. And the more I dive inside myself, the more I empty myself of myself, the greater the light becomes around me. The larger it is, the stronger I see it, the more I feel it, the more it lives inside me. And I know that I am not this person. And I know nobody is. I know that the chickadee and the chipmunk, they're not either. Not even the mosquito. None of us are. And every single one of us is fully and absolutely known to the core of our creation by the divine self and beloved. And I know that. And I know my life will end. And so I can't prove to anyone it's a hallucination, but they can't prove that it is. You can't prove the negative. The proof I have on my side is the life that I've lived. You know who else lived his life as evidence of enlightenment? Is Jesus. And that's what the Gospel of Mark shows. It shows his awakening, it shows his enlightenment, and it shows his going from miracles to storytelling to living a life to show that this is his awakening. And he's not uncommon. Every mystical experience of higher level changes the person who lives the life that results from it, whether they're open about it or whether they're secret about it. It spills out of us. The tens of millions of near-death experiences living in the United States today, as a result of medical science resurrecting, they say resuscitating, the dead, has created a community, a nation, a global nation of near-death experiencers. I can't say all of whom because I haven't talked to all of them, but all the ones I've spoken to come back with a singular message of love. And it's embedded inside of them. And they can't help but live through it. The lens of love. Now, definitely you live through the lens of love inside your own body, inside your own character, inside your own DNA and your education and your culture. And I love to use this guy as an example. Saint Gregory the Grouch was an ass, and nobody liked him. But he was a transcendent, unitive state of being mystic, who lived out his life in this body that was that way. If you have mental illness before you go, you probably have mental illness when you come back. If you have a broken leg when you go, you have a broken leg when you come back. You live your life of mystical experience, of divine presence, of near-death experience through the thing you inhabit. And it's subjective. And not one of us can prove it. But our lives show it. The NDE gave me an immense amount of responsibility. It's more than a sense of responsibility. It's a duty. It's a command. On the morning after on the way home from my near-death experience, we totaled the car. We hit a semi, head on into the rear wheels, and destroyed the car. And left me with a stutter that I had to learn how not to stutter. It was trauma upon trauma. And Tim and I separated. He took the money that we had and took a bus with all the big gear, and I hitchhiked home. And that morning, the second morning of my near-death experience, when I was hitchhiking home, I was by myself under this immense, beautiful sky, and inside of me there was turmoil. And I was looking out at the world, and it was ugly, and inside of me there was this voice saying to me, "You belong to me. You speak for me. You speak for me. You speak for me. Speak for me." But all of my words were taken from me. How do you speak about what's unspeakable? And not only how do you speak about what's unspeakable, I couldn't even think about what had happened to me. Human beings think in concepts and in language. We see ideas inside our heads. We see pictures. We understand our world through language. And I had no language for this. And I realize that sometimes I'm shouting and spiking your mic, and I'm sorry about that. I had no language for this. How can I follow through on my duty to be responsible for others, and speak if I have no capacity to speak. And then I came to understand the speaking of it isn't language. The responsibility of it isn't my job. It's letting the light live through me and letting it speak for itself. That's my responsibility. My duty is to serve humanity. I have spent my life in ministry as a person of service, but never once was it me to give to you. It's always been me getting out of the way and following the light as it gives what it can to you, and me doing what I can around that. So my responsibility is to be a light bearer in the context of my community, and not be obnoxious about it, and not try to convince anybody. I'm not trying to tell anybody what to think or believe, because I honestly don't care what you think or believe. I already know you're divinely loved. I'm never trying to be an evangelical. I'm never trying to convince anyone of any reason. Doesn't matter to me. When I was in high school, I was suicidal. And I thought a lot about it, and I nearly did it. And when I was dead, I was specifically commanded not to take my life. Creator told me, I am Creator, you are my creature. You did not make yourself, you belong to me. You can't take your own soul. You can't kill yourself. You cannot, it's impossible for you to take your own soul. Do not take your life. And so for the first years of my depression, 20 years of my, before I became open about this, for more than 20 years, until 2015, I prayed every day for my death. Every single day I prayed to die. And I've known a lot of people who've killed themselves. Friends of mine. And I see the damage that it does to those who live. It isn't so much that suicide is evil. It's not. It's that it causes so much pain here. It takes the depression and the despair and the darkness and gives a little piece of it to everyone you love. That's what it does. I carry pieces. 2 years ago, my cousin killed himself. Nobody knew, happy-go-lucky, most handsome man in the room every time he walked into it. When I was a young pastor, there was a woman in the hospital whose son, 2 weeks before, had taken his own life, and she was in despair. And I couldn't tell her that I was a near-death experiencer, but I talked about it with her. And the second week I came back to visit her, she said, "You're never going to believe what happened to me. My son, he came to visit me in a dream." I said, "What son? The son who killed himself?" "Yes. And he was glowing light. And he was love inside. And he didn't use any words, but in an instant, he gave me all of this wellness, this forgiveness, this love, this apology, this well-beingness. And I knew that he was okay, better than me." I think that despair is a killer. Cancer is a killer. And I can't blame the cancer patient, and I can't blame the person in despair. But I have worked hard to keep those who are suicidal alive, for the sake of the others, but also because I know the length of a life is the wink of an eye. I wanted to die every day. And I chose to stay alive for the sake of others. And it's not an easy thing to do. But also because I knew that the pain that I caused, I know the pain I cause in life accumulates for me. I expect to go back through another fire of love. And so I spend my life as often as I can in the midst of the suffering that I know that I cause, trying to do as little damage and harm as possible. I've spent a lot of time in my life, in my pastoral career, talking people out of suicide. And sometimes I haven't succeeded. And sometimes I have. And those who I have, they eventually find out that they're not always suicidal. They just happen to have been at that point. Love is an exchange between two individuals, or between a family or friends. But the thing about love is that it's at its root selfless and selfish. And when we're about to lose someone, when they're dying, when they're going through the process of dying, I've so often seen the dying person counseling the living person, especially with long-term death, as the dying person understands their journey, the inevitability of it, and their ego begins to weaken, and the light of divine understanding begins to strengthen. Even if they're atheists, they begin to find strength inside themselves of understanding the mortality of every single human being. But for those who are remaining, grief is deep and dark and real, and suffering is terrible. The thing I want everyone to know is that love has no end. And those sound like a Hallmark card, but they're real. I know they're real because I've seen it, but millions of others of people, tens of millions, know it's real too, because they've experienced love come back to them. Like the woman I talked about with the suicidal son. He came back to her. That happens all the time, because love never ends. If you're the one who's grieving, say everything you want to say to the dying person. Let them say everything they want to say to you. Open every door. Heal every wound. Bind yourselves to each other with love and forgiveness. And that will give you strength. Because dying is difficult for the living. Because we have to release love. Because we have to release the ones we love. And we lose them here. Continue loving them. Grief lasts a long time. Mourning never really ends. The way through is to go live your life and love them still. I love fun. I have always loved fun. I've always been an outdoor athletic kind of person. I find the places that put me into the flow of the present moment are the most fun for me. So I ski in the trees, and I ski moguls at high speed, where I can shut off my thinking and only be in the physical. I love to sail, and I like to race sailboats where you have to be paying attention to everything that's going on at once. I like to bicycle, and because it brings me into the now. I love to read books. I read lots of books. I meditate. I practice yoga. I garden. I write. I spend time with family. The hardest people to love are those who are cruel to you, or those who are just mean to you, or disregard your well-being, or are rude to you. But if you open your interior world to the divine presence, and that lives inside of you, it creates a capacity for humility, and in humility, lack of judgment against another, out of which comes the capacity for treating them more kindly than they deserve, so that they don't need to carry the wound of your emotional response back with them into heaven when they go. And so that changes their life, They don't have to carry that pain. You don't have to respond with pain to pain. Because all the pain that you give away is yours. It's yours to keep, and it's theirs as well. And so instead, take a moment, or many moments, or even days, to find a way to see the other as yourself, and to see their humanity as your humanity.